My wife broke my heart at the company party when, in front of everyone, she chose to dance with her boss, smiling at him as if I didn't even exist, as if all the years we spent side by side had meant nothing. As the music echoed through the room and the lights reflected on our faces, I approached them with my heart torn apart, feeling the world crumble beneath my feet. Each step was a punch to the soul, each laugh of hers sounded like a stab. I looked her in the eyes and, with a firm voice, even though my lips trembled, I said, "I hope you are happy with your choices. I really loved you, but now I feel that this is not reciprocal, so I'm leaving." And so, I left the party, left the life we had built, left behind everything I believed to be true love, carrying only the suitcases of a man who had been betrayed in the deepest sense of the word. As I drove away from that city, every kilometer I traveled seemed to tear a piece out of my chest. Tears flowed silently, mixing with the fury and disappointment that burned like fire in my veins. I spent sleepless nights in the hotel room where I hid from myself, remembering the promises we made, the laughter we shared, the nights I swore to protect her from all harm, never imagining that the greatest harm would come from her. The image of her approaching him on the dance floor repeated itself in my mind like a cruel and endless film, and the voice of my subconscious kept hammering, "How did you not notice before? How could you be so blind as to think that the love you were receiving was true?" Deep down, every little distancing, every excuse for arriving late, every lost glance that I insisted on ignoring, now came back like sharp shrapnel, wounding my dignity and destroying what little was left of my confidence. The new city welcomed me coldly and indifferently, but it was in this silence that I found the chance to rebuild my ruins. I rented a small apartment, far from any memory of her, and spent weeks in a state of shock, alternating between the desire to forget her and the unhealthy need to know if she thought of me, if she regretted it, if even a tear had fallen from her eyes after I left. The nights were the cruelest. Every romantic song that played on the radio reminded me of her perfume, every couple that hugged in the streets was a cruel reminder of what I had lost. It was during a rainy afternoon, while I was walking aimlessly through the wet streets, that a new chance appeared. Her eyes met mine with a kindness that I no longer remembered existed in the world. Her words were a balm for my soul, and in each smile of hers, I realized that there was still life in me. We talked for hours about dreams, fears, and wounds, and in the meantime, I felt my heart being sewn together stitch by stitch, as if God was showing me that true love could still exist, even when everything seemed lost. But fate is capricious, and when the pain seemed to be starting to heal, one day, to the sound of knocking on the door of my new home, there she was, exhausted, thin, her eyes swollen from crying so much, begging for a second of attention, holding my hand with the same strength that a castaway grabs a lifeboat. Her words overflowed with despair. "I made a mistake, I got lost, I need you." And at that moment, time stood still, the ghosts of the past rose, and my mind was bombarded with memories of lonely nights, cold dinners, and sighs stifled into the pillow. I loved her with every fiber of my being, and for that very reason, forgiving her was inevitable. But forgiving didn't mean giving up my new life. It didn't mean forgetting that, while I was drowning in tears, she was dancing smiling in the arms of another. Between us, there was now an abyss of pain that would never be filled. My heart, even though stronger, could no longer see in her the woman who had once been the love of my life. In every chance encounter, in every message exchanged, it was clear that regret was consuming her like poison, and seeing this should have brought me satisfaction, but it only made me realize that I no longer felt anything but pity. Little by little, the new woman in my life became the reason for my smiles, the calm after the storm, the light that illuminated my dark days. And each time she hugged me, I understood that I no longer needed to search for pieces of the past to feel complete. Meanwhile, the woman who had once promised eternal love remained trapped in her labyrinth of regret, calling in the middle of the night just to hear my voice, sending letters that arrived too late, seeking solace in a love that she herself had destroyed. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and with each dawn I felt further away from the pain, closer to a life that no longer depended on the crumbs of affection from someone who didn't know how to value my dedication. In my dreams, I saw her standing at the side of the road, holding out her hands to me, but I just kept going, without looking back, without wanting to go back to what no longer existed. The longing that once tortured me turned into freedom, and with each step I took alongside the new woman, I built memories so intense that they erased the marks of betrayal. And it was in this process that I realized that forgiving is not the same as accepting, that freeing yourself from resentment does not mean giving up your dignity, and that a true new beginning only happens when the pain becomes just a distant memory. For a long time, I wondered if she deserved another chance, if there was still a remnant of us that could be saved from the ashes, but every time I saw her drowning in her own tears, I realized that our fate was already sealed. Deep down, life had taught me that love cannot be rebuilt where there is betrayal, that some wounds may heal, but they leave scars that remind us forever of who we really are. And as I walked hand in hand with the one who made me feel alive again, I had only one question left echoing in my mind: how could someone who had everything choose to lose? This answer, perhaps, is what still makes me wake up in the middle of the night and look to the side, certain that now I am no longer the betrayed man, but rather the man who has finally learned to love himself. Welcome to the channel. We never support any kind of betrayal here. Our stories are completely fictional and serve to show how infidelity destroys lives, corrodes hearts and leaves deep scars. Get ready, because now you're going to hear a shocking story that will stir your emotions. Enjoy the story. When they met at a party with mutual friends, Ethan and Laura felt as if fate had decided to bring them together on that rainy night, when the electricity of the storm seemed to reflect exactly the explosive chemistry between them. He, a financial analyst who, despite his youth, already carried on his shoulders the responsibility of a job that required long hours of work and decisions that could change destinies. She, a marketing manager with a passion for books and dancing, someone who couldn't go a day without smiling, even when the world seemed to be falling apart around her. Their first meeting, marked by laughter that echoed until late, was just the beginning of a relationship that quickly took the form of a modern fairy tale. In the first few months, any difference seemed insignificant compared to the warmth they felt every time they met, and each hug seemed to promise eternity, making time stand still when they were together. Little by little, the families got to know each other and, to their surprise, they bonded immediately. His mother, a loving lady who made a point of filling the table with food when Laura came to visit, was charmed by the young woman's sweetness. Her father, always proud of his daughter, admired Ethan's determination. This family support was the basis for their relationship to evolve safely and serenely, growing stronger with each challenge they faced. They celebrated birthdays, overcame small arguments about the mess in the apartment and his habit of reviewing contracts at night, or her habit of scattering books everywhere, as if the pages were part of the decor. Small imperfections that, at that point, only served to remind them that true love does not require perfection, but understanding. Ethan, despite being reserved, made a point of surprising Laura whenever he could, hidden notes in her purse with sweet phrases, improvised breakfasts on Sundays and unexpected walks in the park on sunny afternoons. Laura, in turn, reciprocated with dinners prepared to the sound of the songs that marked the beginning of their relationship, affectionate voice messages during work hours and simple but meaningful gifts, such as a bracelet engraved with the date they met. Their relationship was built on these small niceties that, added together, created the feeling that nothing could shake what they had achieved together. The apartment they decided to live in after a year of dating reflected this union, walls decorated with paintings they had bought on short trips, plants that Laura insisted on taking care of, even when Ethan said he had no talent for gardening, and a sofa where they spent hours cuddling watching movies that they had both already memorized the lines to. Mornings were filled with routine, but, curiously, it was in this predictability that they both felt safest. Laura would wake up early, make coffee while he was still stretching, and they would have breakfast together, sharing plans for the day. On certain days, when one of them had to leave early, the longing would already begin before they even closed the door. Goodbyes were never cold, always accompanied by a long kiss that said more than any words. At night, they would meet again, tired but smiling, exchanging stories about work colleagues, goals achieved and dreams that seemed increasingly possible when they were side by side. There was something magical about how, even on the most ordinary days, they managed to transform the home they had built into an inviolable refuge. Their closeness caught the attention of their friends, who often said that Laura and Ethan were the perfect couple, the model of relationship that everyone wanted to have. They smiled awkwardly when they heard this, but deep down they felt proud, because they knew how much they fought to keep alive the flame that united them since the first time they saw each other. Fridays became sacred for meetings, just the two of them, new restaurants, movies, or even home evenings with pizza and wine. On Saturdays, they met up with friends, traveled to nearby cities or simply slept in, enjoying each other's company without rushing anything. And on Sundays, they liked to walk through squares and markets, choosing fruits and vegetables for the week, while discussing the colors they wanted to use to paint their room or the destination of their next trip. At work, they were both recognized for their dedication and talent, which often required overtime and, at times, temporary absences for training and meetings outside the city. Even so, they kept in constant contact, affectionate messages during the day, quick calls to wish each other good luck before important meetings, and even nighttime video calls to see each other, even if only for a few minutes, before going to bed. This mutual dedication allowed them to get through periods of stress and fatigue without their relationship suffering. Laura always said that the secret was to never go to bed angry, and Ethan made a point of following her example, no matter how difficult the day had been. Together, they learned to laugh at problems, plan solutions, and celebrate each small achievement as if it were a monumental victory. During the third year of their relationship, they decided to make their union official in an intimate ceremony, surrounded only by family and close friends. It was a sunny day, with white flowers decorating the small garden of the chosen location, where they promised love, respect, and complicity before emotional glances and warm applause. The first toast was between laughter and tears of joy, the first dance took place under soft lights that seemed to dance along with them, and the full moon illuminated that night as if it were also blessing the new phase they were beginning. The honeymoon, brief but intense, was spent in a cabin in the mountains, where they were able to forget about the world and live days that seemed suspended in time, discovering new flavors, landscapes and caresses. When they returned home, the routine seemed even sweeter. They set up the guest room together, discussed names for future children, and wrote lists of places they dreamed of visiting in the coming years. Each choice they made was a promise that their love would be cultivated with patience and dedication. And so they continued, between household chores and plans for the future, between nighttime hugs that dispelled any fear and words of encouragement that they made a point of repeating whenever the other felt insecure. Even friends who initially doubted the intensity of their relationship began to comment on how rare it was to see two adults so committed to making each other happy. Ethan would often surprise Laura with short getaways to the beach during long weekends. Laura, in turn, would organize romantic dates in charming hotels nearby, so that they could reminisce about the early days of their relationship. But despite all the harmony, there were also the difficulties that every couple faces, disagreements about expenses, about tight schedules that limited their time together, about career priorities that, at times, required sacrifices. At these times, they argued, exchanged harsh words, but always remembered the love they felt and how important it was to find their way back to each other. Reconciliations were moments of vulnerability that only strengthened the bond between them, because they showed that, above all, there was a sincere desire to remain together. With each obstacle overcome, the couple became stronger, more confident that, despite the imperfections of the world and their own mistakes, they had something rare and precious that could not be broken by ordinary setbacks. The apartment continued to be the main stage for the best memories, birthdays celebrated with improvised candles, burnt dinners that ended in laughter and pizza orders, rainy afternoons where they lost themselves in board games and TV series marathons. The atmosphere was overflowing with affection, and the walls bore witness to promises whispered in the dark, plans confided in the first rays of dawn, and confessions that, to many, would seem insignificant, but to them were fundamental. And so, the days piled up like chapters of a story written by four hands, each one putting on paper another paragraph of dreams and achievements, of fears and overcoming. In the looks they exchanged upon waking, there was the certainty that, no matter what happened, they would be together, ready to face whatever came their way. Over time, their social life began to revolve around their career commitments, company parties, networking events, and meetings with colleagues at trendy bars and restaurants. Laura, with her outgoing nature, made friends easily, moved easily among groups, and was always the center of attention in conversation circles. Ethan, more reserved, preferred to observe and participate only when he had something relevant to say, but he was proud to see his partner shining. On these occasions, it was common to see them holding hands, smiling at each other as if they shared an invisible secret that united them more than any signed contract or party attended. And even though there were colleagues who did not hide their admiration, even a hint of envy, for their seemingly unshakable relationship, they remained confident, certain that nothing could corrupt what they had built. Every detail of their daily lives, every minute spent discussing plans, every comfortable silence sharing the same sofa, contributed to the idea that their story was destined to last forever. The apartment remained a sanctuary where they could be vulnerable without fear, where tears were not a sign of weakness, but of complicity. Every corner bore their marks, from the carelessly torn armchair to the desk full of notes and travel photos that they had hung on the walls. Their favorite songs echoed through the room, lulling them into lazy mornings and whisper-filled nights, constantly reminding them of how lucky they were to have found each other. But deep down, there was a subtle restlessness, an imperceptible shadow that hid among the small frustrations of everyday life, silently waiting for the right moment to grow. The weeks following their third wedding anniversary brought Ethan and Laura a more intense pace of life than they had ever experienced before. Their projects were moving forward in their companies, and meetings and demands seemed to multiply with each dawn. Breakfast conversations became faster, interrupted by tired glances and mental lists that needed to be reviewed before leaving. The sofa that had previously welcomed long hugs became a place for whispered discussions about deadlines and priorities, while weekend trips, which had always been a refuge for the couple, began to be postponed indefinitely with empty promises of next week. Laura began to arrive home later, citing last-minute commitments, events with colleagues, and meetings that extended well beyond business hours. Ethan, immersed in his own reports and endless reports, preferred not to question it, because he blindly trusted the woman he had chosen to share his life with. When he noticed her absence from home, he convinced himself that it was just the result of the professional growth he had so encouraged. However, in the silence of the apartment, the echo of footsteps sounded louder than ever and, on the nights he slept alone, the bed seemed cold and too wide. Fridays, once sacred, became just another day of work, and the routine of meeting at night to share their tiredness was lost amid hurried exchanges of messages and phone calls that ended with promises of future compensation. When they were together, Ethan noticed Laura always with her cell phone in her hands, responding to messages that made her smile discreetly. Believing he was paranoid, he tried to push away bad thoughts, striving to remember every act of affection she had shown him in the previous years, but the feeling of distance became more palpable. On Saturday mornings, Laura seemed exhausted, sleeping in late and only getting up when he was already immersed in work emails, leaving the apartment silent, as if they both lived in parallel worlds separated only by thin walls. Close friends began to notice that something had changed. In occasional meetings, they would notice Laura distracted, repeatedly looking at her phone and interrupting conversations to answer calls that seemed too urgent for a Saturday night. Ethan, on the other hand, made an effort to keep up appearances, smiling and complimenting his wife whenever someone asked how they were, even though deep down he felt his heart ache for not knowing how to answer truthfully. The jokes about the perfect couple began to sound bitter to those who knew them best, and even the laughter they shared at dinner could no longer mask the distant looks they exchanged. At home, every dawn when Laura arrived without much explanation, Ethan pretended to be asleep, but his heart beat wildly, attentive to the sound of her keys, the heels she took off when she came in, the whisper of messages she continued to type as she settled into bed. Sundays became especially difficult, symbolizing nostalgia for happier days that now seemed increasingly distant. Walks in the park were replaced by separate trips to the gym or different cafes, as if they were subconsciously avoiding being together so as not to face what had become obvious. Ethan began spending more time outside, accepting invitations from colleagues for lunches that he had always declined before, but still could not fill the emptiness that was spreading inside him. Laura, on the other hand, seemed more restless, changing her clothes several times before going out, as if she wanted to impress someone, and avoiding eye contact when he asked simple questions about her day. The complicity that had always been the foundation of their relationship seemed to slowly dissolve, like a sandcastle swept away by the waves of a rough sea. One night, when he realized that Laura wouldn't be back early, Ethan went out to walk through the streets lit only by the yellow streetlights, searching at every corner for some sign that would explain what was happening. The cold breeze of the early morning cut his face as he tried to organize his thoughts, going over in his mind every detail that could indicate where they had started to get lost. Deep down, he fought against the idea that Laura could be sharing secrets with someone other than him, but the uneasiness turned into a physical pain that tightened his chest with every step. When he returned home, he found the apartment silent and dark, except for a dim light coming from her cell phone, forgotten on the counter with the screen lit and a notification flashing. His eyes fixed on the device as if it were a window to a world he didn't know, but the loyalty and love he had always felt made him look away and leave it where it was, preferring to sink into the sofa with thoughts that prevented him from sleeping. The next morning, Laura looked more radiant than she had in a long time, getting ready with an enthusiasm that sounded almost cruel. Ethan tried to compliment her on the new outfit she was wearing, but her response was a distant smile and a hurried kiss that landed on his cheek like an automatic gesture, without emotion. He watched the door close behind her, the sound of the latch sounding like a sentence. He turned on the television to try to distract himself, but the images and voices seemed distant, unable to drown out the buzz that echoed in his mind. The messages between them became formal: "I'm home, good night, I've already eaten," and even those began to become rare, leaving room for deafening silences. Ethan began to notice the different scents he smelled when he hugged Laura, scents he had never seen at home, intense fragrances that seemed to scream the presence of someone closer to her than he had ever been. The excuses for unpostponable commitments multiplied, and the clothes she wore became increasingly elegant, bought especially for occasions that never included Ethan. In the few meetings they still had at home, the conversations became tense, punctuated by long sighs and questions answered in monosyllables. The hands that had once been intertwined now rested distantly on the table, and the smile that had made him feel like the most loved man in the world had disappeared, replaced by neutral, almost impatient expressions. The nights became unbearable for Ethan, who turned from one side to the other in the empty bed, remembering the warmth of Laura's body, the perfume on the sheets, the laughter that echoed through the room. Each memory was a dagger that stuck deeper into his chest, feeding a pain that he could no longer hide even from himself. On a rainy Friday, Laura's company organized a big party to celebrate the closing of an important contract, and, as on so many other occasions, Ethan was invited to accompany her. Throughout the day, he felt sick to his stomach, a feeling he couldn't explain, but that accompanied him as he put on his suit, adjusted his tie and looked at himself in the mirror, trying to find in his own eyes the confidence he had always had. When they arrived at the venue, an elegantly decorated hall with pendant lights reflecting off crystal glasses, the atmosphere seemed to conspire to make everything perfect, but the distance between them, even as they walked side by side, was more evident than ever. Ethan watched Laura greet colleagues with warm hugs, laugh at jokes he didn't understand and exchange long glances with people he didn't recognize. As they walked around the party, Ethan noticed that Laura's gaze was lost in the crowd, as if she were searching for something or someone specific. He felt out of place, like an extra on a stage that no longer belonged to him, and with each song that played, the feeling of exclusion intensified. When they announced the opening of the dance floor, Laura approached Ethan with a tight smile and invited him to follow her to the dance floor. He accepted, albeit reluctantly, determined to save any spark of what they had built. But before they could take the first step, a tall man with a confident smile approached her naturally, extending his hand to invite her to dance. Her hesitation lasted only a second, long enough for Ethan to feel his heart drop in his chest, before he saw her accept the invitation with a smile he hadn't seen on his face in months. The sound of music filled the room as Ethan watched, paralyzed, as the woman he loved was led around the dance floor in the arms of another man. Each movement she made to the music was like a sentence, each laugh she shared with the stranger sounded like confirmation that something precious was irretrievably lost. The light spun around the room, casting reflections that dazzled his eyes and made the tears that insisted on coming seem like just another effect of the lighting. He couldn't look away, as if he still expected her to look back at him, to reach out her hand to him, but that never happened. And, the moment the music changed to a slow ballad, her face pressed against the other man's chest was all he needed to be sure of what his heart was already screaming silently. Pain took over every fiber of his body as he took a deep breath, feeling that something inside him had broken once and for all, while, right there, the betrayal revealed itself in each beat of that cursed dance. The music still echoed in Ethan's mind as he left the hall, each chord sounded like mockery, each laugh that came from inside the building made his stomach churn with indignation and disappointment. He walked along the sidewalk wet by the light rain that was beginning to fall, feeling more alone than he had ever felt, his footsteps echoing in the emptiness of the night as if they marked the end of everything he believed in. When he reached the apartment, the key seemed to weigh tons in his hand, and the silence of the home that had once been a shelter felt more suffocating than ever. He didn't turn on the lights, he just let himself fall on the couch, his mind spinning with confused thoughts about when things had started to fall apart. The images of her dancing with the other man mixed with the memories of the past, creating a torture that prevented him from sleeping. When tiredness finally won, Ethan had restless dreams about the promises they exchanged at the altar, the hope they had built together, now crushed by the betrayal he had seen with his own eyes. The next morning, he woke up to the sound of his cell phone vibrating on the coffee table. It was Laura, sending him a message asking him to wait for her at home to talk. His heart was beating as if it was going to explode, fear mixed with an anger he never thought he would feel for her. While he waited, every object in the apartment seemed to remind him of what they had experienced, the armchair where they watched movies, the shelf with books they had chosen together, the plants she cared for with dedication. When he heard the key turn in the lock, he took a deep breath, straightened his posture and kept his gaze fixed on the door, determined to face whatever came. Laura entered slowly, her eyes red and her face haggard, as if she already knew that nothing she said would change what was about to happen. Ethan remained silent, waiting for her to be the one to start, and after a few seconds that seemed like an eternity, Laura let out a deep sigh and said she needed to talk, that she couldn't bear to carry everything alone anymore. She began to speak hesitantly, saying that the distance between them had not appeared suddenly, that every night she arrived late and every morning they spent without looking each other in the eye were symptoms of something that had been slowly rotting. Ethan listened silently, his fists clenched, as she told him how lost she had felt, how she had begun to seek in other conversations the attention that he, according to her, no longer had time to give. Each word felt like a knife tearing his flesh, but he stood firm, knowing that he needed to hear everything, even if it hurt. Laura then told him about the encounters that had started as innocent lunches, then dinners that went on until late at night, and finally nights when she did not come home, nights when her smile belonged to someone else. Ethan stood up, walking to the window as if the air inside was no longer enough to keep him standing, while tears that he swore he would not shed flowed silently. When she finally managed to speak, her voice was weak but full of pain. He asked her when their love had become so fragile that it could be destroyed so easily. He asked her if at any point, while she was in the other man's arms, she had thought about everything they had built together, about the dreams they had shared. Laura began to cry, saying that she didn't know how to answer, that she felt shame and regret, but that it was too late to undo what she had done. Ethan held back the tears that threatened to overflow, while he confronted her with questions that were hammering in his mind. He wanted to know if there was love in what she had experienced with the other man, if she had really exchanged him for something that was so worthwhile that she would destroy everything. Her tears grew louder, and between sobs, Laura confessed that what hurt her the most was realizing that, even though she had destroyed everything, she still loved him more than anything else in the world. Then, in a moment of silence so thick that it seemed as if the air had disappeared, Ethan asked what had really made her come to him now, after everything, after exposing his betrayal in such a cruel way. Laura took a deep breath, her face stained with makeup smeared by tears, and began to reveal the secret she had kept as her last trump card. With a choked voice, she confessed that since the day he left the party and disappeared, she had realized that she could not live without him, that every night that followed had been filled with despair, that every attempt to find him consumed her insides. But what made her completely lose her strength was discovering that he was not only rebuilding his life, but had found another woman, someone who made him smile in a way she could no longer. Laura confessed that she had come not only to ask for forgiveness, but because she had learned from mutual friends that he was living a new story, that he was no longer the man who cried for her, but someone capable of loving another person with the intensity that he had once dedicated only to her. At that moment, Ethan turned to her with teary eyes, but with a serenity that disconcerted her. He said it was true, that he had met someone who brought back the joy that she had destroyed, that each day with this new woman was like remembering who he was before he was betrayed. Laura fell to her knees on the floor, sobbing that this couldn't be happening, that she couldn't accept seeing him move on, that she had always believed that, even if he discovered the betrayal, there would still be time to rebuild. But Ethan, with cutting calm, explained that the love he had felt for her was not enough to erase what he had seen on that dance floor, that forgiving her didn't mean going back, and that the life he was building now was proof that he deserved someone who would never make him doubt his own worth. Laura crawled toward him, holding his hands as if trying to hold back sand that was slipping through her fingers, begging him to look at her, to remember the trips, the dreams, the promises whispered in the dark, but Ethan stared at her with the pain of someone who had loved deeply and had his heart broken, saying that those memories would always be part of him, but they could no longer be the present or the future. She screamed that she loved him, that nothing she had experienced with the other man mattered anymore, that she just needed a chance to prove that she could be the wife he deserved. But Ethan shook his head, explaining that true love is not measured by what we do after everything falls apart, but by what we choose to do to protect the one we love while everything is still standing, and that she had failed in that irreversibly. At the height of her despair, Laura revealed that she had spent weeks trying to find out where he was, that she had traveled to the new city, knocked on doors, cried in hotels looking for any trace of him, and that when she found out about his new partner, she felt the ground disappear from under her feet. Ethan, with his eyes fixed on hers, said that he would never wish her harm, that he forgave her from the bottom of his heart so that he could live in peace, but that the page had been turned. He said that his heart was free and that there was no more room for the pain she had caused. The silence that fell after these words seemed to scream louder than any fight they could have had, and when Laura tried to hug him, he gently pulled away, showing that the decision was final. She stood there, kneeling, looking at him as if she could still find in his eyes the reflection of the man who loved her above all else, but what she found was the serenity of someone who had finally found herself again. Ethan finally walked to the door, opened it firmly and told her that it was time for her to leave, that life did not wait for those who cling to the past, and that he had already waited too long. As Laura left, her sobs echoing through the hallway, Ethan closed the door softly, leaned against it and let out a heavy sigh, not of sadness, but of relief in knowing that, despite the pain, he was ready to live a new chapter, without shadows, without lies, only with the certainty that he would never again accept less than what he deserved. Laura's tears were still streaming when the door closed behind her, the dull sound echoing in the hallway like confirmation of a fate that could no longer be changed. Ethan stood there for a few minutes, breathing deeply, while his chest tightened with the intensity of what he had just experienced. The air seemed heavy, laden with memories that danced around him like stubborn ghosts, but little by little, the atmosphere of the apartment began to change, as if Laura's departure had taken with it some of the weight that was suffocating him. He walked to the window, opened it to let the wind in, bringing with it the fresh smell of the night and the liberating feeling that, finally, life could move on. Still, the silence seemed screaming, as if the walls wanted to remind him of the whispers, the laughter and the promises that once echoed there. Determined not to drown in these memories, he began to collect objects that reminded him of what had been destroyed, photos that preserved smiles that no longer existed, old letters that spoke of dreams that had been lost, small ornaments bought on trips that now hurt more than they brought joy. Each object placed in the box seemed to represent another broken link, another liberation. In the middle of this process, Ethan's cell phone vibrated on the table, interrupting the silence. It was a message from Sophia, the woman who had unexpectedly entered his life and shown him that it was still possible to feel lightness in the heart. She asked if he wanted company for dinner, because she felt he might need someone. Ethan smiled with a mixture of gratitude and surprise at the kindness of someone who barely knew his pain, but could sense his silences. He said yes, he would love to see her, and began to tidy up the apartment with more dedication, as if preparing the environment would also prepare his soul for a new beginning. He took a long shower, let the hot water wash away the feeling of impurity that the betrayal had left on his skin, and when he left the bathroom, he felt lighter, more whole than he had in a long time. He dressed carefully, not to impress, but to feel good about himself, aware that each detail marked a step towards a new phase. Sophia arrived a few minutes later, bringing with her the soft scent that Ethan already associated with peace. When she entered the apartment, she looked around and noticed the boxes piled up in the corner, but she didn't ask any questions. She just walked over to him and hugged him tightly, as if she knew exactly where his wounds were. The hug lasted longer than any words could, and when they pulled away, her eyes met his with a serenity that disarmed him. They went to the kitchen to prepare dinner together, and each simple gesture, chopping vegetables, stirring the sauce, setting the table, seemed to carry a deep meaning, as if together they were rebuilding something that had been shattered. Their conversations flowed naturally, light but deep, interspersed with smiles that reminded Ethan of who he was before the pain took over. At one point, he allowed himself to confide part of what had happened, without going into details that still hurt too much, but making it clear that the previous night had marked the definitive end of a story that needed to end. Sophia listened in silence, holding his hand on the table, her eyes attentive and understanding, without judgment or empty advice. When he finished speaking, she lightly squeezed his fingers and said in a soft voice that no one should live trapped with someone who did not know how to value the love received, that forgiveness was liberating, but that moving on was essential to not be a slave to the past. Ethan felt her words like a balm, each syllable helping to heal wounds that he feared would never close. After dinner, they sat on the couch, and there, for the first time in months, he truly laughed, at simple things like childhood stories and funny memories that she shared. It was as if life began to color again, bringing shades that he thought he would never see again. The atmosphere between them became so intimate that, when Sophia rested her head on his shoulder, Ethan felt that the space Laura had occupied in his heart was finally being filled by something new, something healthy. Her hands traced imaginary lines on his arm as she talked about dreams she still wanted to fulfill, trips she wanted to take, books she longed to read, and he found himself involved in every word, every smile, as if he could see a future that made sense. At one point, Sophia looked up, staring at him intensely, and asked if he was really ready to leave the past behind, not for her, but for himself. Ethan took a long time to answer, because he knew that that question carried more weight than anything else said that night. Finally, he took a deep breath and said yes, that the pain was still there, but that it no longer controlled his steps, and that he wanted to build something new, something real, without ghosts that haunted every gesture. The light-hearted atmosphere turned into something deeper when Ethan told him how, at that party, the betrayal had revealed itself to him in every movement, every smile that was no longer meant for him. Sophia held his face in her hands, telling him that he didn't need to carry that anymore, that he shouldn't allow someone's mistake to erase the beauty of everything he could still experience. Her words made tears flow, not of sadness, but of relief at finally feeling understood. When they kissed, it was with the delicacy of someone who knows that the other is still in the process of healing, but also with the intensity of someone who wants to be part of that healing. The kiss didn't bring any rush, but rather the feeling that, for the first time in a long time, the world was in the right place. The next day, Ethan woke up before sunrise. Sophia was sleeping peacefully next to him, her serene face illuminated by the dim light coming through the window. He stood there watching her, feeling his chest warm with gratitude for having found someone who not only saw his pain, but also his strength. He got up silently, made coffee for both of them, and placed flowers in a small vase on the table, feeling that those small gestures meant more than any speech. When Sophia woke up, she found him smiling, she held out her hand to him, and together they had breakfast in comfortable silence, between looks that said it all. As the morning progressed, they began to plan a walk in the park, something simple, but for them it meant a giant step towards a future free of sorrows. The weekend passed with such ease that Ethan could no longer remember what it was like, and every conversation, every shared laugh, reinforced the certainty that he no longer needed to look back. Still, he knew that he needed to definitively close the chapter with Laura so that there would be no more loose ends. In the following days, he calmly organized the divorce paperwork, scheduled meetings with lawyers and took care of everything slowly but firmly, no longer like a devastated man, but like someone who was clear about what he deserved. When the day came to sign the papers, he found Laura in the lawyer's office, and the difference between the two of them seemed glaring. She was exhausted, her makeup did not hide her swollen eyes, and her voice trembled when she asked if there really was no chance of reconsideration. Ethan calmly replied that no, that the love he had felt for her was not stronger than the pain he had caused, and that, although he forgave her, he could not give up the peace he had found. The final words were said without rancor, but with the conviction of someone who knew that the cycle needed to be closed. When they left the office, Laura tried to hug him, but he pulled back, placing his hand on her shoulder affectionately but firmly, saying that he hoped that one day she would also free herself from the weight of regret. Then he walked away without looking back, feeling that each step he took towards the sunny street was another step towards freedom. The phone rang shortly after. It was Sophia asking how he was, and hearing her voice was like receiving confirmation that it was all worth it. They agreed to meet at a nearby cafe, and when Ethan arrived, he found her smiling, the most sincere smile he had seen in months, and he knew that, no matter what, from then on he would no longer have to walk alone. As they talked, Ethan told him about his last conversation with Laura, how he had felt a strange mix of sadness and relief, but that now he felt lighter than ever. Sophia held his hand under the table, her thumb stroking the back of it, gently telling him that life didn't always go the way we dreamed, but that the twists and turns of fate sometimes took us exactly where we needed to be. Her words echoed in Ethan's mind, not as comfort, but as the purest truth. They spent hours there, talking about the present and the future, making plans that included trips, projects, and dreams that he thought were lost forever. Each idea shared rekindled in Ethan the flame of someone who wanted to live, of someone who knew he deserved more than what had been destroyed. When they left the cafe, they walked hand in hand through the streets, feeling free and ready to face whatever came their way, because there was no more room for lies or regrets, only for the hope that shone in every glance they exchanged. Ethan knew that the scars would still be there, but he understood that they were part of who he had become, painful memories that would serve as proof that true love does not destroy, but heals. Each step by Sophia's side reaffirmed the certainty that he was ready to live fully, with an open heart to start over. As the sun set on the horizon, he looked at her and realized that, despite the dark nights he had faced, there were dawns that were worth every battle fought, and that the true victory was having the courage to move forward with dignity and self-love. The hours after the divorce papers were signed brought Ethan a silence so profound that it seemed to echo in every corner of the newly organized apartment. The boxes with wedding memories had already been taken to the storage room, but the feeling of transition still hung in the air like a thick fog, each breath filled with a mixture of relief and uncertainty about the next steps. He walked from one room to another, realizing that, even though there were no longer objects that connected him to the past with Laura, there was still the weight of years of living together that could not simply be erased with a signature. At the same time, he felt a strange serenity settling in his chest, as if each detail of the last conversation with her had finally freed the part of him that insisted on reliving what no longer existed. While organizing documents in new folders and reordering books that had been scattered around for weeks of neglect, I reflected on everything I had experienced in recent years, clearly perceiving the difference between forgiving and forgetting, understanding that, even though there was still a trace of affection for those who had shared so many moments, moving on was the only possible choice. However, the emotional scars still throbbed from time to time, especially in the moments when he found himself alone at home at night, in absolute silence, when memories infiltrated like a cold wind through the cracks in his heart. At those times, Ethan remembered Laura's smile, the way she fixed her hair in the morning, or the inside jokes they made that no one else understood, details that, for years, made their relationship so unique. Each memory, however, was accompanied by the pain that the betrayal left, as if the memories were sharp knives that cut deep, reminding him that no matter how many good times they had, everything had been compromised by her choice to break the trust that was the basis of everything. Still, there was also the growing strength that drove him forward, fueled by each meeting with Sophia, each long conversation about the future, each look that confirmed that it was possible to start over without carrying invisible chains. Sophia, in turn, was patient and understanding, realizing when Ethan needed space to process the pain that was still healing, but also knowing exactly when to reach out and pull him back to the lightness they had discovered together. On walks in nearby parks, in cozy cafes, or even on lazy afternoons at home, the two slowly built an intimacy that went far beyond attraction, based on the trust and dialogue that Ethan valued so much and that he felt had been missing in his previous relationship. At times, he found himself sharing fears that he had never confessed to anyone, revealing insecurities and desires with a transparency that surprised him, realizing how the new relationship not only helped him overcome the past, but also made him grow as a person, rescuing dreams that had been set aside. Sophia, listening to his every word, showed that she wasn't there to fix him, but to build something new from the man he was now, whole in his imperfections, and that made Ethan feel more alive than ever. During this period, Ethan began to reflect on how love can be both a source of healing and destruction, depending on how it is cultivated or neglected, and this awareness led him to wonder if, deep down, he had also played a part in the downfall of his previous marriage. Although he knew that he could never be held responsible for her choice to cheat on him, he recognized that he had allowed himself to be consumed by work and responsibilities, allowing the cold routine to take up the space that was previously dedicated to gestures of affection and mutual care. This thought was not a way of blaming himself, but rather an exercise in self-criticism that he believed was essential to avoid repeating patterns that could sabotage the new relationship that was blossoming. These reflections made him feel a mixture of fear and hope, because he was determined not to let the past repeat itself, but he knew that the only way to keep love alive was to be present in every detail of everyday life, valuing what mattered before it was too late. The bond between Ethan and Sophia became even more intense when she invited him to spend a weekend in a cabin in the mountains, far from everything that reminded him of commitments, pressures, and especially the city that held so many painful memories. The trip was marked by deep conversations during the journey, shared laughter amid the cold outside and a comfortable silence that only exists between people who allow themselves to be vulnerable without fear of judgment. During the walks along the trail surrounded by pine trees, Ethan confessed that he was afraid of giving himself completely again, as he still felt the scars burning in the moments when he was happiest, as if the pain wanted to remind him that everything could fall apart again. Sophia, in a low and soft voice, replied that love is not guaranteeing that there will never be suffering, but rather choosing, every day, to build something that makes life worthwhile even if there are risks, words that echoed in Ethan's mind with the force of a revelation. The nights in the cabin brought warmth amid the biting cold that enveloped the mountains, and the intimacy between them reached a new level, but not only physically, it was a meeting of souls that recognized each other in their wounds and desires, as if they had waited for this moment all their lives. As the fireplace crackled with flames that illuminated their faces, Ethan realized that not only could he smile without guilt, but he also felt proud of the strength he had had to not cling to what hurt him. When Sophia asked him about his childhood dreams, he spoke for the first time in years about the plans he had to visit other countries, learn new languages and maybe even write a book about everything he had experienced, dreams that he thought were buried under the rubble of his old relationship. She, with genuine enthusiasm, encouraged him to resume each of these projects, reminding him that the past did not need to define who he would be from now on. When they returned home, the feeling was that something had changed profoundly, as if the trip had marked not only the beginning of a new phase, but also the symbolic end of the cycle of pain that Ethan had been carrying. He began to realize that the memories that had previously been filled with anguish no longer had the same power over him, as if each day spent with Sophia was disarming the traps that had held him back. The routine that had resumed in the city seemed lighter, work flowed better, and the messages they exchanged during the day made the hours more peaceful, with healthy expectations about meeting up after work. On one of those days, Ethan was surprised by Sophia with a dinner in her apartment, carefully prepared, with candles scattered around the living room, creating an atmosphere that mixed romance and comfort. Between one dish and another, the conversation deepened until it reached a point that they both knew was inevitable, their future together. Ethan spoke with an open heart about his fear that the pain he had experienced would once again interfere with his ability to build a solid relationship, and Sophia calmly said that she did not expect perfection, but rather the willingness to walk side by side, taking care of each other on good days and bad. These words brought Ethan a sense of relief and strength, as they showed that love did not have to be a prison, but rather a partnership in which both helped each other grow. The moral dilemma that presented itself to him was as subtle as it was devastating. Would it be fair to start a new story when the scars of the past still existed? Would it be right to offer someone a heart that, although in the process of healing, still bore deep scars? He did not want to do to Sophia what Laura had done to him, give only part of himself and hide the shadows. Honesty, which he had learned the hard way was indispensable, became his greatest commitment at that moment. As the days went by, Ethan dedicated himself not only to working and investing in his relationship, but also to rebuilding himself as a man, pursuing activities that he had long since abandoned. He went back to playing sports, got back into the habit of reading before bed, and started writing in a journal to reflect on everything he had experienced, as a way of organizing the emotions that still emerged unexpectedly. This process helped him realize that, even if he could not erase the past, he could build a future that was not defined by it. Sophia, always there, encouraged him not to rush, showing him that starting over did not need to be a race, but rather a path that was worth enjoying step by step, and this patience made him love her even more each day. Conversations with close friends also became important, because although many of them already knew about the events that led to the end of his marriage, it was the first time that Ethan allowed himself to speak openly, telling how he had felt, how he had thought about giving up on everything and how, surprisingly, he had found strength where he never imagined. These conversations not only strengthened his bonds with people who truly cared, but also helped him realize that his story, however painful it was, could serve to inspire others who were facing similar dilemmas, showing that it is possible to survive disappointment and still find meaning to move forward. In this context, Ethan began to be invited to participate in support groups, where he shared his experience and heard stories that, in many moments, mirrored the pain he himself had felt, but also revealed the human capacity to reinvent oneself. As life went on, the duality between remembering and moving forward became a constant exercise. There were days when, upon seeing a couple exchanging affection on the street, the image of Laura would flash through his mind, but there were also days when, with Sophia by his side, all he could feel was gratitude for the chance to start over. This fragile balance was his greatest learning experience, as it forced him to deal with his scars without letting them control his steps, showing him that a man's strength does not lie in never getting hurt, but in getting up even when the world seems to have collapsed around him. And so, little by little, Ethan realized that he no longer needed to be afraid of the future, because now, more than ever, he himself was writing his own story, and each choice made, each shared smile, each renewed dream, was proof that, despite everything, there was still much to be lived with courage and an open heart. Time began to flow more smoothly for Ethan after he found a balance between past and present, but even with his routine returning to an almost normal rhythm, his heart was still sensitive to rain, prone to unexpected reactions when a memory appeared uninvited. On the mornings when he woke up with his head heavy with dreams that mixed old scenes with new faces, Sophia noticed his silence and, without asking anything, simply offered him a long hug, as if to remind him that he no longer had to face everything alone. This silent gesture was so powerful that, many times, the pressure in his chest dissolved just by feeling her presence. As the weeks went by, Ethan gradually made room in his life for new experiences that not only confirmed his ability to start over, but also showed him that genuine joy can be born in places where before there was only pain. He went back to attending cultural events that he had always loved, but that he had abandoned because of the rush and the bitterness that had set in after the betrayal. On one such night, he invited Sophia to accompany him to an open-air concert, and as the music filled the darkness of the torchlit park, he found himself moved not by the memory of what he had lost, but by the beauty of what he was building alongside her. The conversation flowed easily between them on the way back, lulled by the distant sound of the last chords that echoed through the night, and the lightness of the moment was interrupted only when Sophia, with the courage of someone who loved without reservations, asked if he had already forgiven himself for everything that had happened. Ethan stopped for a moment, surprised by the depth of the question, because until then he had been so focused on forgiving Laura that he had not considered that he still blamed himself, even if unconsciously, for not having noticed the signs or for having believed too much in the person who betrayed him. He took a deep breath, held her hand and said that perhaps the hardest forgiveness was this, because it meant accepting that he had no control over other people's choices and that, no matter how much he wanted to, he could not have prevented what happened. Sophia smiled sweetly, came closer and whispered that there was nothing wrong with having trusted, that trust is a virtue, not a flaw, and that, in fact, it was this ability to love so deeply that made him special. These words penetrated deep into his heart, like a balm that soothed wounds that he didn't even know were bleeding yet. In the following days, life took on new colors, not because of the absence of challenges, but because of the willingness to face them alongside someone who shared their dreams and fears, without hiding behind excuses or cowardly silences. Ethan and Sophia began planning short trips, exploring neighboring cities and discovering together landscapes, flavors, and stories that became theirs alone. Their complicity grew stronger when they got lost in the streets of picturesque villages, when they drank coffee in bakeries where no one knew them, and could laugh out loud, hug each other without reservations, forgetting the world around them. On one of these trips, sitting on a deck by a lake, Sophia held Ethan's hand and shared a secret with him, that she had also suffered in the past from the betrayal of someone who claimed to love her, and that, because of that, she understood better than anyone the baggage he carried. The silence that followed this confession was different from any other they had ever experienced. It was not heavy, but full of mutual understanding, as if they both knew that there, at that exact moment, something greater was being consolidated between them. This connection motivated them to talk about the future more clearly, not as if they were making impulsive plans, but as two people aware of their pain and desires, aware that love involves daily choices. Ethan revealed that he was thinking about moving apartments, as he wanted a space that would not hold memories of pain, but rather allow him to start something new, and Sophia offered to help him look, smiling as she said that she did not intend to rush anything, but that she would love to be part of this new home, whether as a friend or something more. The naturalness with which she said this warmed his chest, as it showed security and respect for his pace, without demands or pressure. They spent weekends visiting properties, imagining what the spaces would be like with their personal touches, discussing wall colors, types of furniture, details that, little by little, made the future seem closer and more possible. During this time, Ethan also decided to resume therapy, which he had abandoned during the emotional chaos of the divorce, not out of desperation, but as a way to continue evolving. Sophia enthusiastically supported his every decision, and together they spoke openly about what they had learned from the pain they had faced, about how they intended to protect their relationship so that past mistakes would not be repeated. This constant dialogue brought security, eliminated ghosts before they even appeared, and made Ethan realize that he had never had such a solid foundation in a relationship. On a particularly cold night, when they returned home after a fun dinner, Ethan invited Sophia to sleep over at his house, not only for her company, but because he felt that he was ready to share his days and nights on a regular basis, without the fear that had once paralyzed him. The next morning, they woke up hugging each other, and as the sun timidly illuminated the room, they talked about the possibility of making their relationship official in the future, not as a patch for the pains of the past, but as a celebration of the love that was born free of lies and regrets. Sophia confessed that, since their first meeting, she had felt something special, but that she had feared it was just empathy for the sad story he carried, and Ethan, with his heart racing, said that, for him, every moment with her confirmed that they were building something rare. This sincere exchange made them both realize that, even though they were in no rush, they were walking in the same direction, and that, for the first time, they were dreaming together with the lightness of someone who didn't need to hide anything. Meanwhile, Laura remained distant, but not absent, as she sent sporadic messages, sometimes asking for news, sometimes begging for a chance to talk. Ethan read every word, but did not respond, not out of contempt, but because he knew that any interaction could open wounds that would eventually heal. He then decided to talk to Sophia about the discomfort these messages caused him, and, with the maturity she always demonstrated, she suggested that he block contact, not to punish her, but to protect himself and the relationship they had built. He hesitated, but after thinking about it, he realized that this decision symbolized the real end of a cycle that he no longer needed to drag on. When he blocked her, he felt immediate relief, as if a weight had been lifted off his shoulders, and when he told Sophia, she simply hugged him, proud of his strength and determination to move forward. A few days later, while organizing documents on his desk, Ethan received a visit from an old friend who, unaware of the recent events, asked about Laura and how his married life was going. Ethan smiled calmly, explaining that his marriage had ended, but that he was now living a period of learning and rebirth. The friend, surprised by his calmness, said that he had always admired him for the intense way he loved, but that, after everything he had heard, he admired him even more for his courage in not allowing himself to be hardened by disappointment. These words resonated with Ethan as confirmation that he was on the right path, because, even with his heart scarred, he had not lost the ability to believe in love and to love deeply. This trust was reflected in every detail of their daily lives, in the improvised lunches where he and Sophia would share confidences, in the nighttime walks where they would get lost in conversations about dreams, in the moments when they would simply remain silent, feeling complete only by each other's presence. On one of these days, as they watched the city from the top of a hill, Ethan spoke of his fear that their love was just an escape for both of them, a desperate attempt to fill the voids left by past relationships. Sophia then held his hands, looked into his eyes and told him that love is not about filling, but about overflowing, and that they loved each other not to fill holes, but because they found in each other the courage to be who they truly were. These words dispelled the last shadows that had hung over him, bringing him a peace he had never imagined he would feel again. The new apartment, which they had found after so many visits, began to be prepared with enthusiasm. Each unpacked box was a source of joy, each object placed in its place symbolized the official beginning of a shared home. Ethan made a point of personalizing each room with touches that mixed stories of both of them, and Sophia was moved to see how dedicated he was, how every detail was thought out so that they both felt at home. As they painted the walls together, between laughter and clumsy brushstrokes, they confessed to each other that, even without knowing what the future would hold, they were willing to face any storm if they stayed by each other's side. And so, with each gesture, each look, each word, they built a solid present, preparing themselves, without realizing it, for a future that promised much more than they had dared to dream when their lives crossed for the first time. The last rays of the sun were dyeing the sky orange and purple when Ethan finished organizing the last box in the new apartment, his heart beating with gratitude for having made it this far after everything he had faced. Looking around, he saw a home full of life, with objects that told a story that began there, marked not by pain, but by the courage to start over. Sophia appeared at the door holding 2 glasses of wine and smiled when she found him admiring the surroundings. She walked over to him and handed him a glass, and there, they toasted the future they were building together, toasted the daily choice to love without fear, to be honest even when the truths were difficult to tell, to protect each other like those who understand the value of those who almost lost themselves one day. The toast was not only a celebration, but also a ritual of closing the past, a silent pact that, from then on, everything would be different, without lies, without silences that corrode, just 2 people who decided to share not only the bed, but dreams, fears, and joys. In the days that followed, the couple's routine was established naturally. Each breakfast together was filled with conversations about plans, each night ended with hugs that seemed to heal the remaining pains. The love between them was built in small details, good morning messages, affectionate notes stuck on the bathroom mirror, laughter that echoed during the movies they watched on the couch. Even when the rush of work prevented them from seeing each other as much as they would like, they maintained the commitment to not let silence turn into distance. They talked about everything, including the ghosts that appeared from time to time, and thus, they strengthened the trust that sustained the relationship. The home they built together became a refuge, a space where wounds finally healed, and where every corner was a reminder that they no longer needed to fear abandonment or lies. Meanwhile, Laura found herself trapped in a cycle of regret that was becoming increasingly suffocating. The first few months after signing the divorce were marked by failed attempts to get her life back on track. She sought support from friends, but discovered that many had drifted away when her betrayal came to light. She tried fleeting relationships that only deepened the void, and each new encounter reinforced the certainty that she had lost something irreplaceable. At home, memories of the moments she had spent with Ethan haunted her, and the silence in the rooms echoed the laughter that had once filled that space. Regret became a constant presence, eating away at her nights of sleep and turning her days into long periods of anguish. The photos she had kept became torturous memories, and even the songs that had once made her happy now sounded like the soundtrack to everything she had destroyed. In a moment of despair, Laura tried to seek comfort in the man she had gotten involved with, but discovered that he had moved on with his life without any remorse. There was no love, only convenience, and realizing this was like feeling the ground disappear from under her feet. Every attempt to contact Ethan was ignored, and this increased the feeling of helplessness. She began to attend self-help meetings, trying to find meaning in the midst of the chaos she had created, but nothing seemed to fill the gap that her own choice had opened. Her professional life, previously her greatest pride, also began to crumble, as her emotional instability began to reflect on her work, leading her to make mistakes that resulted in warnings. Each dawn was marked by a growing feeling of regret and loneliness, as if the world was charging the price for the lies she chose to tell. While Laura was immersed in her own choices, Ethan and Sophia expanded the life they were building. They decided to adopt a dog, a small Labrador that brought even more joy to the house. Walks in the park with the animal became part of their routine, moments when they talked about the challenges of work and planned trips they would take when they had time. Each new experience consolidated the feeling that they had found something rare, something that went beyond the simple desire to be together. It was a partnership that was born of respect and a genuine desire to see the other grow. Sophia began to introduce Ethan to her friends and family, who quickly fell in love with the thoughtful and generous way he treated everyone. He, in turn, felt welcomed, part of a circle that valued honesty and saw love as a commitment, not convenience. Time, which had once been a cruel enemy during lonely nights, now seemed like an ally, as each month that passed strengthened the relationship, transforming what could have been just comfort into an indestructible bond. Ethan became increasingly confident, not only in the love he offered and received, but also in himself. He resumed old hobbies, such as photography, and began to record the happy moments he lived, creating albums that kept real memories, without pretense, memories that he knew he could revisit without feeling pain. Sophia, in turn, invested in her own dreams, encouraged by her partnership with Ethan, and the two discovered that true love does not nullify individualities, but enhances them. They learned to talk even about their most intimate insecurities, transforming weaknesses into opportunities for connection, understanding that sincere dialogue was the greatest antidote against repeating past mistakes. In the rare moments when he remembered Laura, Ethan no longer felt hatred or resentment, only a serene lament for those who did not know how to value what they had. He understood that forgiveness was necessary to avoid being imprisoned by what he could not change, but he also knew that it was not up to him to rescue those who did not want to be saved. This awareness freed him, allowing him to love Sophia without reservations, without letting ghosts interfere in his decisions. Together, they began to organize a long trip abroad, something Ethan had always dreamed of, and now, with someone by his side who shared his desires, it became a real project. Every detail planned increased the feeling of achievement, as if each step taken towards happiness was also an answer to what he once thought was impossible to recover. Laura's end, on the other hand, was marked by self-imposed loneliness, as shame prevented her from rebuilding bridges with people who could help her, and her wounded pride prevented her from genuinely apologizing. Her nights were filled with regret, and her mornings with an emptiness that no distraction could fill. The image of Ethan living his happy life was like a cruel mirror, showing her everything she had lost. In a final act of courage, she wrote a long letter asking for forgiveness, not expecting reconciliation, but only relief for her own conscience. Ethan read the letter calmly, in silence, and when he finished it, he closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and burned the paper in the fireplace, not as an act of contempt, but as a closing ritual, accepting that their story could no longer be part of his journey. In this last gesture, Ethan sealed the past, leaving behind the pain that almost destroyed him, and definitively opened himself to the present that he was building with Sophia. They decided to officially live together, celebrating their union at an intimate dinner with friends and family who were rooting for the couple. The night was marked by laughter, sincere declarations, and promises to continue taking care of each other, like two souls who understood that life can be cruel, but it can also reward with unexpected loves those who do not give up believing. Each toast made that night sealed the certainty that true love is not born from the absence of suffering, but from the courage to overcome each tear, each disappointment, each night when the heart thought about stopping. And now that the story has come to an end, tell us in the comments what you thought of this narrative. We really want to know your opinion about each choice made, each emotion experienced. Take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel and not miss any more stories like this. Remember that our goal here is to show how betrayal destroys families, loves and dreams, but also how it is possible to rise from the ashes when you have the courage to leave the past behind. We never support any form of betrayal, because we believe that true love only exists where there is respect and truth. Until the next story.